Father God, we thank you for your goodness, oh God. God, we thank you for your grace towards us. God, we thank you that you are faithful, you are true, you are never changing. And Lord, we thank you that we can rest in that. Lord, as we open up your word this evening, I pray that we would have faithful eyes to be able to read well, to be able to understand, that you would give us your Holy Spirit to enlighten our hearts and our minds, that we might not just know these things, but that we would love them. In Christ's name that we pray. Amen. All right. So we are continuing on in John chapter 1. We're going to keep on going there this evening. John chapter 1, as we continue to look at this idea of holiness. And I'm sure that some of y'all are going, all right, you're way off of the holiness path right now. We have gone from holiness to light to life to glory, and now we're looking at grace and truth, and what is going on here? I think this is John's way of giving us a picture of who God the Father is. And I get that from verse 18 of chapter 1, just so you know, that no one has seen the Father, but Christ Jesus, the only Son, has made him known. And so this knowledge of the Father coming through Jesus in all of these different ways is, I think, John's point as he's opening up his book. And so, anyway, as we're going in, last week we looked at the beginning of verse 14, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He tabernacled with us. The Word becoming enfleshed dwelt with us, and we have seen His glory. And when we talked about glory, when I was a kid, the first thing that popped into my head whenever you talked about something being glorious or having glory was shiny. I don't know if that was just a kid thing or what, but like the radiance idea, something glowing and shining. That was always the big idea that I thought of whenever I thought of something being glorious. And you think about it, when you see Moses up on the mountain and he says that he wants to behold God's glory, and God's like, you can't handle that, but I'll let you see a little bit, I'll let you see my backside, and he passes by and shows him his goodness. But then he comes down from the mountain after this experience of being in the presence of God, and what was his face doing? It was shining. And so, like, that picture was there, and then the New Testament version of that is when we see the three closest disciples go up onto the Mount of Transfiguration with Jesus. And what did Jesus do there? He was transfigured before them, and he shined. And so that's not a wrong thought to think of, glory as this shining forth. But what is it a shining of is the idea here. It's a shining of His character, of God's very essence. And that's just not something that we can really easily put into a few sentences and describe it. It takes a lot of effort to just kind of get a picture of who this God is and what He's all about. I mean, people write full commentaries and systematic theologies just on this topic of, let's talk about who God is. And so that's why I think the first chapter of John is a beautiful picture as we see all of these things kind of unfolded. So as we continue on in verse 14, we see that we have seen His glory. It says, glory as of the only Son from the Father. Okay, now we got to pause a second before we get into the rest of the stuff, because we're saying that we've seen His glory as of the only Son. And that word, if you flip over to your third page, where I've got both Exodus and John chapter 1 there, you can see these, and you'll see that I have the English there, plus the Hebrew or the Greek, and then how it's transliterated, how to read it in that other language. This is what would be called an interlinear, just a simple way to have individual English words and the Hebrew or Greek word that's behind them, so that you can see the actual text of the ancient manuscripts that are there. This isn't showing you the root of that word and all the different things that you're looking at. It's just reading it the way you would read a Russian or Spanish text. And it's putting the captions below it kind of idea so that you can kind of follow along and see it. And also, if you look, you see where next to the Hebrew or Greek word, you have a little number there. That actually shows the word order in the original. So 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Usually it comes along there. But once you get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, of course, everything's going to be, there we go. At 14, where it says, who will by no means clear the guilty. You see how 14 comes before 13? So clear not the guilty is kind of the idea there. So anyway, it shows the original word order. But if you will take a look there and see that in John chapter 1, verse 14, and notice I skipped over 15 and 16 here just because I wanted to cram 14 and 17 together to see the themes that are there. But in verse 14, it says of the only Son. And notice those arrows. See the arrows that are under of and the and son, pointing there to that word monogenes. Now, monogenes is one word that means all of these things. Mono meaning one, and genus, you've heard of that, right? Not Genesis, nope. But think of when you're classifying an animal. The genus, phylum, species, all of that. Genus is one who is like. Okay, so when it says of the same kind would be the idea here. So it's translated son, and it's usually translated that way. It's not just translated when we're talking about God's only Son, but in other places, in Luke and in John, it refers to Jesus healing the only son of someone. You've got Jairus' daughter and things like that, and they're raised back to life. They're the only son of that person. Okay, they're one like them. Okay, it's of their family. And so that's the idea that's coming here. This is an idea that we have to look at a little bit, because it can be a tricky slope to get on when we start talking about Jesus as the Son of God, right? Because we go, oh, wait a second, if he's the Son, does that mean he's somehow lesser than God? And there's been many theological arguments and talks about this over the millennia. But this idea of monogenes is not saying that he is proceeding from the Father as a secondary creation. He's not coming like God made him or invested a man with his power or spirit, but rather that he is one who is of the very same kind as God. He's cut from the same cloth. He is very God of very God, is the way the ancient texts would talk about it. And we see this in Hebrews as well, that he is the exact representation of God's nature. Okay, the two authors, I think, must have at least been on the same page with each other, John and the author of Hebrews here, if not actually being the same author in fact. But anyway, so now that we see who this is, okay, so we've seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father. So does that mean that it's not actually the glory of the Son, but it's just as of that? I mean, it's kind of like his glory? No, this is saying that this is his. This is actually the glory of God shown through Jesus Christ as the one who is like God. And we see the only God idea as well down in verse 18, again, where I said that no one has ever seen God. The only God, the one who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. And so this picture of Jesus being the one who makes the Father known, who gives a picture of the Father's very nature, of his glory, is what John's trying to get at here. And he's going to sum up into 2 words in the end of this sentence what it means to behold the glory of God. And he says that this glory is full of what? What are these two words that he looks at? Grace and truth. We have seen his glory. We've beheld his glory full of grace and truth. Now, how do we even start to hone in on this? Because those are such big ideas. So I just wanted to, and this is a very much a sit down and chit chat kind of night, because these are things we've got to wrestle with and play around with. I know I say that a lot. I'm going to not do it tonight. I'm going to not play around with these ideas and pull the thread. Sorry, I went back and listened to previous nights, and I was like, oh, I say that way too much. Anyway, so when you think about the two ideas of grace and truth, what comes into your mind? What's your first initial thoughts as you think about Jesus being full of grace and truth? Okay, authentic, and that would you'd play that off of which word or both? Truth. Okay, so authenticity. Good, good. What else? Jesus is full of grace and full of truth. Okay, mercy of God. Yep. Yeah, so you see these two ideas kind of in tension with one another, grace and truth. Okay. Anything else? So in case you have missed it, I have another verse here for you to look at. I think that John has in mind, as he is speaking of beholding the glory of God, I think he's pulling us back to this story in the book of Exodus, where we see Moses asking to see the glory of God, and God revealing his nature, God showing something about himself and telling Moses who he is, giving more details about his character. I think that John is playing on these ideas, and he's going to kind of refer back. And so I wanted you to be able to see them so we could make some connection points here. But in order to do so, you got to be able to cross the gap in between Hebrew and Greek, which that's not always very fun. Okay, so let's look at these things. I want to look at grace, and I want to look at truth. So grace, and you can see I've written it out here. Instead of giving you so much of just words that have kind of their text and how it would be translated, this is more of a theological summary of this word. And there's so much more that could be gone into. Grace is one of those wells that we could keep diving into over and over and over again, and we will for the rest of our lives. But this is trying to get a simple understanding of some of the main words that are looked at as we're talking about grace in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay, and so as we look at it, I want you to look right here in the first paragraph. So the Old Testament concept of grace is one of the central themes of the Old Testament, especially in describing God's character and his interactions with his people, with Israel. Grace conveys the idea of a person's favorable disposition towards another. Favorable disposition towards another. And we would usually translate that and talk about it as someone finding favor in the eyes of someone. Well, that is the common, basic Old Testament understanding of grace, is to find favor in the eyes of someone. And that is, here it's this noun, hen, or in its verb form, chanan. Okay, so when you get it there, you see that someone is in a higher position, someone is in a more powerful position, and they're looking upon another whom they have power to do with what they would choose to. And this kind of gets back to how we talked about glory last week, that glory is not just shining, it's not just God's righteousness, it's not just God's life and power, but it is his kingly rule. Okay, that is a focus here, I think, that John is is honing in on as he thinks about the glory of God as God's righteous, kingly rule over all of mankind, all of humankind. The kingdom of God is present in Jesus Christ. And so as he's showing his kingly nature, he is showing it full of these two big ideas, full of grace, or favor, as we would see it in the Old Testament primarily, and truth. So these two big channels that are affecting the way that he looks at us as the eternal judge and king of all the world. Okay, so he's looking down upon us with favor. And that's amazing because we don't deserve it, right? I mean, that's what grace is. It's undeserved merit or undeserved favor. Some have played around with the idea of grace as God's riches at Christ's expense. A little acronym there. And that pulls in the New Testament idea, certainly, but it's not wrong. It's not wrong. God's riches at Christ's expense. So the fact that God is showing favor and showing grace, giving riches to one who is undeserving, that can't go on forever. God can't just continue to pour out to one who is undeserving. There has to be a reckoning because there is not just grace, there's also justice and truth. And so these two, as Rob said, have to hold hands. They've got to be married, and Christ is the way that they are held together. Grace and truth in tension with one another. All right, so we've got this idea of favor that's here, and you can see some texts that are here, but I want you to focus right on the second paragraph, and that's where we're going to spend a good chunk of our time. It says, Exodus introduces a formulaic statement about God's character. This is in Exodus chapter 34, verse 6. We're going to turn there, or you can look on the page that I've given you. It says that God is compassionate. That's the word rahum. Okay, and gracious. Okay, there's that same word for favor. Okay, notice Hanan versus Hanun. The vowels can change around, but as long as you see that HNN, that is the big, what we would call a lemma. In Hebrew, you usually have either 2 or 3 letters, and those are the big consonants that are there. The vowel pointing can change all around it, but those 3 main letters in the consonants in Hebrew, that's the way that word is tied to other words. So you can have the verb form, the noun form, adjectives, and they'll all look really similar. They just change the voweling around a little bit. Okay, and that's also the way that Hebrew writers would have rhymed, because the voweling wouldn't have been there like we normally rhyme with vowels and endings of words. They get the kind of idea of rhyming by using the same 3-letter word. So that if I have a word that's HNN in Hanan there, if I wanted to rhyme with it and bring up those ideas, I would use another word that has the same HNN, or at least HN and another letter, getting it as close as possible. And so Rahum and Hanun are tied to each other a little bit because they share some of the similar letters, and they're used together over and over and over and over again. Okay? It says that he's compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding with loyal love and faithfulness. We'll get to that in a little bit, but variants of this statement, including at least the words Rahum and Hanun, are repeated throughout the Old Testament in a myriad of different settings, revealing Israel's fundamental understanding of God as one who has acted favorably towards them. So let's look at a couple of these passages. Go to 2 Chronicles, verse 30. Chapter 30, excuse me. Second Chronicles chapter 30 and verse 9. And this is the celebration of Passover after Hezekiah has restored temple worship here. It says in verse 9, "For if you return to the Lord, your brothers and your children will find compassion with their captors and return to this land." Why? "For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful and will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. So gracious and merciful, this idea of Hanan is pulled on as describing God's character. And I wanted to focus on this and take a moment to look at grace in the Old Testament because it is so prevalent. It's everywhere. But if you talk to just kind of the average person on the street and you ask them about grace in the Bible, they'll say, oh, well, that's like New Testament stuff. Jesus was the one that showed grace, but the Old Testament it's a God of judgment and he's angry. And honestly, if you look at John, just read John chapter 1 on a very basic level, it almost seems to tell you that. If you look at verse 16 here in John chapter 1, verse 16, it says, "For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." And it almost seems to put those two at odds with one another. The law came through Moses, but notice there's no but. Notice there's no thing that's actually pulling these across. This is a filling up, as Rob's been talking about in Sermon on the Mount. Christ didn't come to abolish the law. He didn't come to do away with the law. He came to show us what it truly is all about. He came to fill it up. And so Moses, the law came through Moses, and again, that's John looking back at this story of Moses on the mountain with God at Sinai, looking for God's glory, receiving the law. All of this happens there. And so he's not trying to make a distinction between the two and say that, oh, well, Moses just had the law, but Jesus is grace. No, it's saying that God's character has always been grace and truth. Moses received the law as a showing of God's grace and truth in the Old Testament. Now Jesus has come in the New Testament as the full display of God's grace and truth. Isn't that what Hebrews says? That in many times, in many different ways, God has spoken through his prophets of old, but now in these last days, he's spoken through his Son. So they're saying the same thing in two different ways. But what I don't want to do is build this wall between the Old Testament and the New Testament where we have the law versus grace. That's not the way that it is. The law is grace. That God would take time to build a relationship with a people in the middle of the desert who don't deserve to even have the time of day with him, that is grace. That he revealed his character to them slowly and carefully and painstakingly over hundreds of years is grace and truth showing up in the law. Okay, so these aren't at odds with one another, the law versus grace. The Old Testament and the New Testament are one united story leading to Christ. Okay, so as we think about grace, let's keep going on. Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 17. And you'll notice a lot of these are passages where we are seeing a returning of the people, or at least the man of God is calling for a return, saying you need to come back to God, that this is not the way. Nehemiah, got to get there. All right, Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 17. It says, "They refused to obey and were not mindful of the wonders that you performed among them, but they stiffened their neck and appointed a leader to return to their slavery in Egypt." Okay, so this is referring back to the time in Exodus right there, and they're saying, "We don't want you, Moses. Well, Moses, you're not who we are asking for or calling for. It was better in Egypt. We're going to find somebody else who will lead us back to Egypt instead." And that didn't go well for them. But Nehemiah focuses here and says, "But you are a God ready to forgive, gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and did not forsake them." Like, despite their forsaking Moses, despite their turning their back on God and his plan plan to bring them into a good and plentiful land, he didn't forsake them. He maintained a remnant for his own. Okay, so there's this idea. And why did he do it? He didn't just do it because he liked them a whole lot. He did it because of his character, because of who he is. He is a God who is merciful and gracious and doesn't forgive the unrighteous, but who is abounding with love and faithfulness. So there's just so much that is good here. And we could go into Psalms 86. I do want to look at Psalm 103:8, just because it is such an import. It's almost exactly word for word of what we see therein. And that's really what this is. This is probably one of the most, if not the most, quoted of all scriptures within the Bible. So like the Bible quoting itself, this passage here from Exodus 34 is really, really well attested all throughout the whole Bible. Constantly, over and over again, this description of God's character is used. So 103 verse 8 says, "The Lord is merciful and gracious." And I'll go up to verse 7. It says, "He made known his ways to Moses." Right? So it's referring back to this very incident. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel, that the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. I mean, just the psalmist here is going off. David is going on and on, gushing about God's grace, because he recognizes that he doesn't deserve it. This is a gift of God. And so as we see this word Hanan repeated in the Old Testament, it is the biggest way that we see God's mercy and grace both kind of coming together, because they generally are showing up together. Grace and mercy, or compassion and grace, are linking together as we're looking at the character of God, all coming back to this passage. All right. The Old Testament concept of grace is also related to that of mercy, as illustrated by the Septuagint translation. All right, so then we start to get into the Septuagint here. That, again, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. Okay, so one of the best ways for us to understand from a 2nd century BC, so this is before Jesus, Jewish mind, of what they were understanding about the Old Testament scriptures, is to look at the Septuagint. If we want to get ourselves into the mindset of how the people were thinking about who Messiah was, what God's eternal plan was, what the main meaning of the Old Testament was, we look at the Septuagint because it's an update. You've got the Old Testament scriptures in Hebrew, and then come the 2nd century BC, everything gets translated into this kind of Jewish mindset, because everybody are into the Greek Jewish mindset. So you're overlapping these two worlds together as you do this translation. And as they did that, you get some other words that get lumped in with this idea of grace. You can see that the word Hanan and gracious gets translated not with the normal word for grace in the Septuagint, but actually with the word for merciful, eleo. And Hanun, gracious, so Hanan and Hanun, same words there, same roots, it gets used with el-elman. Okay, so merciful. And those Greek terms express a specific type of kindness, a specific type of mercy directed towards someone who is in need. And so there's this overlap, and you continue to see other overlaps with ideas of beneficence, someone who is giving to one who is in need, such as loving kindness, which we're going to get to here, mercy, and goodness. And so the main word, however, the big Greek word that is used to translate the word grace is the word charis, or charis. It's where we get our word charismatic from. Okay, so if you have a charisma about you, you have a grace. There's a gift that you have. That's the root there of charisma. Charisma means a gift. You've got a gift. You've got charisma. And that's just a Greek word. It's an import directly over. But when you have this idea of charis coming through. This is the main New Testament concept of grace, charis or charisomai. I'll read here. It says that they are terms that refer to the quality and practical application of a beneficent disposition towards someone. Okay, so if I have a beneficent disposition, I'm looking at someone who is in need and I am being generous towards them, this is the kind of basic way to say that I'm going to show you grace. I'm going to give to you what you don't deserve, and I'm going to be kind towards you. That's general meaning here. And I love the idea that we see down in the last paragraph. Paul loves grace. Paul talks about grace all the time. He's the grace man in the New Testament. But he actually changes up the common Greek way of greeting another person. Like, it would have been really common for someone to greet someone in a writing or even on the street and to say, blessings to you. But Paul changes it. He doesn't say blessings and peace to you. That would be the Greek way. Peace would have been the Jewish way, right? Shalom. Shalom, peace to you. But instead he says charis, grace to you. Not just a blessing, not looking at blessings coming, but the grace of God being shown to you. Grace and peace to you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, right? You see it over and over again in Paul's writings because he recognized how key, how intrinsic grace is to the Christian story, to the story of the whole Bible. Okay? All right. Any thoughts, any questions on grace? There's just so much we could go into with these different words and ideas, but I want to save enough time for us to look at truth as another thing and to compare these two verses. Go ahead. It's mercy, yes. Lord have mercy. Kyrie there. I think it is the same word, if I am remembering right. Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy. Kyrie eleison. I think it is. I think that Kyrie eleison is is that Latin? Maybe an import to Latin. And so it may be Greek. I don't know off the top of my head right there, but I think it at least is the same root that's there. Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on grace before we turn the page? Well, not saying we can't come back because there's lots here. Okay. So I think, go over to your passage there in Exodus chapter 34. And as we describe here, we looked at the Lord, a God merciful, Rahum, and Hanun, Rahum wa Hanun. Okay? And what word did we say is the word for grace? Charis. Charis is our big word that's there. So look down at the end of verse 14 and see how we can now see glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of charis, or charitos is there. And you can see in verse 17 the same thing. Law was given through Moses. Hey, charis is given through Jesus Christ, comes through Jesus Christ. So this is on the last page, looking at John and looking at charitos as the translation for grace and charis as the translation for grace in both 14 and verse 17. Okay, so I think you can circle merciful and gracious in Exodus 34 and draw a line straight down to John's ideas, and he's putting this idea of merciful and gracious into one Greek word, grace, charis. Okay? All right. Now, let's talk about truth, because we still have the rest of Exodus 34:6 to look at here with this rest of his description. Okay? So truth. This concept of truth is a word emet. Emet. And you know this word. You have said it in many different ways and lots of times. Every time you pray, I bet, you say a version of emet. Amen. Amen. Exactly. It's the same M-N, amen, amet, emet is right there. It's the same word, but it means truth. So when you say amen in church, when we're saying, yeah, that's right, that's truth, that's good, that's correct, I agree with this. That's all of the idea that's kind of tied up here in proclaiming this. This is true, this is good, this is right. Okay? There's more to it, though. When we think of truth, Teresa, I'll put you on the spot, as a teacher, hinting there, as a teacher, when you think of truth, what are you thinking about? Well, if you have a test and there are questions that have a false or a true, the true is the what? It's the right answer. It's the right answer. And I think at a basic level, whenever we in our modern society, and even I think in normal Greek society, they had shifted from the Old Testament mindset of truth into a newer idea where they were kind of beginning to play around with it. I did it again. They were beginning to tweak these ideas, to tweak the idea of truth. And you can see this a little bit in Pilate when Jesus says that he is the truth there, and Pilate's like, what is truth? What are you talking about? Everybody's got their own ideas about this. Jews have their truth, Greeks have their truth. And this is really common today, right? We all have our own version of truth. And when you think about truth as just a right or wrong answer, it really narrows this idea down. Because if that's what truth is a correct answer, the accuracy, if that's what truth is, then what does it mean that Jesus came full of truth? Does it mean that he's the encyclopedia? That, when I need a good answer about something, I just go to Jesus and look there, and yep, I can see there's the answer, there's the correct answer. It's in Jesus. He's full of truth. Yeah, I think that's part of it. That's a little bit, but is it the full understanding? Is it all of what is meant when we talk about Jesus having truth? So let's read here a little bit. I said that the Old Testament concept of truth, emet, is grounded in the idea of dependability or reliability, not accuracy. That wasn't the Old Testament idea. The Old Testament idea wasn't primarily that truth was about someone being accurate, but it's more of the way that I would say that if I am a good husband and I'm true to my wife, what does that mean? Does it mean I always tell her the truth, that I'm honest? That's part of it. But if I'm true to my wife, it means I'm not what? I'm not going to cheat. I'm not messing around. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm dependable. I'm reliable. You can believe me. You can count on me that I'm not going somewhere and doing something I'm not supposed to do, right? There's a reliability that is there in truth. In the Old Testament mind, this is the main idea. Dependability and reliability. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is lining up true. It's right. It's the plumb line is the straight line, but it is not just an accuracy, because we can look at it in that way of, yes, this is an accurate, parallel or perpendicular line or something there and get a measurement, but it's also the way that we know how to go. It's a steadfastness, something we can count on. You can count on that plumb line falling straight every time. Gravity is going to pull it down unless you're leaning on you're moving around a lot or something. I don't know, but it's gonna hang straight. I do the same thing whenever we're looking at cameras and stuff. We line up cameras, and sometimes we'll line things up and try to do it horizontally, and I'm like, that's not right. Horizontal changes based on your perspective. Just think about how you move around and look at the horizontal lines that are around you. But vertical is always vertical. It's always going to be straight up and down. If you do this, you're off center. Like you have changed your perspective there. But vertical is still going to be always vertical. It's true. It's something you can count on. And that reliability, I think, is the big idea that the Hebrew mind had, that was still there in the Greek mind, but it had been almost eclipsed by this idea of accuracy. And that came a lot through, Greek philosophy and thought, that everybody wanted to be right. They wanted to be able to argue their point and argue their case and say, yes, this is true. But because it's something you can count on. It is. It is. Yeah. That whole house is going to be lopsided, like building your house on the sand, right? So keep on going here. Grounded in the idea of dependability or reliability, a quality of being trustworthy that can be applied to speech, thought, intent, legal testimony. It describes what is real, what is actual, what is valid, what is genuine and correct in legal and ethical context. And I think that is the primary way that we would think about it, right? When you think of something as true, it's real, actual, valid, genuine, and correct in legal and ethical context. And that's part of the idea here. But I want to lean into this dependability and reliability side of things because I think that's the heavier weight that we get from the Old Testament. And that's going to help us as we look at Exodus 34. That sense of real-world dependability can also be abstracted to describe truth as that which is only potentially true, or even that which is misrepresented as truth. Okay, so truth could refer to other things, and you can look at those there as you see that passage in Genesis 42 or in Jeremiah 14. But we also see truth as something that describes not just people or not just God, but lots of different things. As a quality or attribute of God himself, though, and the righteous people who attempt to emulate him, I'm at the beginning of the second paragraph, truth or the desire for truth is often presented as the basis for all righteous behavior. And yes, this is good that God is the one who is true, and so those who are seeking to be righteous, to follow after him, should follow in this truth, in these right ways. And so when the Bible speaks of righteousness, specifically in the Old Testament, it's this idea of following the truth, being a reliable person, which is why you can have, and this is coming off the top of my head, you can have something like Rahab or the Hebrew midwives. The Hebrew midwives who lied to Pharaoh about what they were doing, or Rahab who lied to the people who came looking for the spies. Yes, did they tell a falsehood? Yes. But was their heart true? Like they had a true and reliable purpose in what they were doing. And so that reliability and dependability was what was really being argued here. And so they can be commended for their faithfulness, even though they told a lie. Like so it really kind of bristles against our ideas because we want to put it in one category when I think the category's bigger in the Hebrew mindset, at least. Okay, let's keep on going. It says, in this religious sense, truth exists as an external standard for behavior modeled after the reality of God's innate truthfulness or faithfulness. Go to Psalm 119, verse 160. You know what Psalm 119 is all about, right? All about the Word of God. Psalm 119. 160, longest chapter in the Bible. It says, the sum of your word is truth. All of your word, the whole of your word is truth, is reliable, is dependable. And every one of your righteous rules, looking at the law there, right? This is pulling on the law. Those righteous, true, good rules endures forever. That comes right back to what Jesus said, right? The law of the Lord is not passing away. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be fulfilled. It's true. It's going to stick around. And so the concept is contrasted. This idea of truth is contrasted with wickedness. So the wicked versus the truth, those are two separate things. And again, we would think of wicked and good, right? But this idea of truth, emet, keeps coming up as we look at these passages. Of falsehood, that we get, right? Truth and falsehood, those are the normal ways that we think of it. What about truth and corruption? As you see the prophets calling for the kings of Israel to be righteous, to do right by people, they are calling them to do the truth, do righteousness, do what is true, not be wicked and corrupt, not to take bribes and do this, to remain on this narrow way. Okay, so there's a bigger idea at play here. But I want you to see that one of the most frequent uses of emet, this is there on that third paragraph, comes in the formulaic phrase, chesed ve'emet. Chesed ve'emet. And we're going to see it here in Exodus chapter 34, verse 6. That is his steadfast love. That's the most basic translation of hesed. Hesed is a word that we could spend a whole night on, just on hesed. It is God's covenant love, his faithful, loyal love to his people, chesed. And loving kindness is the way it gets translated a lot of times. But steadfast love, I think, is a good translation. We just don't use that word steadfast a lot. It stays fast, it sticks, it lasts. It is faithful. Okay, so faithful, loyal love. And faithfulness. Okay, so this word faithfulness is the word emet, which is translated truth a whole bunch of times. But as we see it in this combination, we see God's faithfulness and his loyal love together. And that's the way that we see it in Exodus 34. And look at the list of other places where we see it together. Genesis 24:27, Genesis 32:11, there in Exodus 34, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. Somebody pick one of these. Pick one. Let's go to it. Which one you want to do? All right, let's do it. 2 Samuel 2:6. We could go on to any of them and look at them. They are all rich and beautiful as we look at God's nature here as not just true, but also faithful. Okay, so 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. It says, now may the Lord show steadfast love, that's chesed, and faithfulness, emet, to you. And I will do good to you because you have done this thing. So this is David getting anointed as king, and we're calling out here and saying that that God should show his covenant, loyal love and his faithfulness to David. Let's look at another one. Psalm 25, verse 10. 25, verse 10. We just saw in Psalm 119 that all of the words of the Lord are what? They're gracious. They're true. But here we see that the paths of the Lord, this is Psalm 25:10, all the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his testimonies. These two get linked together over and over and over again. And so in our mind, do we do we think of true and faithful as synonyms? Because I think in the Hebrew mind, it really is. And that was why I tried to bring up the idea of a marriage, right? If I'm true to my wife, or I was trying to think of illustrations. One of the ones that I came up with is kind of silly, but it's fun. There's a song by the Beach Boys that I used to sing whenever I was a kid, talking about you've got to be true to your school, like you'd be true to your boy or your girl, right? So you got to be true to them. Well, what does that mean? Be true to your school. Don't lie to your school. No, that's not the idea. It's that you're faithful. It's that you're going to root for them. You're going to be there, right? There's a commitment that is there. And so with that idea, this idea of truth and faithfulness makes sense with God's loyal love. He has this covenant love that is not going to give up. It's going to remain faithful, even though we are faithless, right? That's the picture that we see here. And so when John is pulling on this idea of truth, and he's referring back to Moses receiving the law, and he's looking at all these Exodus images, and he's looking at this, I think that he is pulling on this idea of truth and carrying it through, and he's using it to link these two ideas together, this chesed ve'emet. So, look on your passage there, and look where you see chesed ve'emet, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That steadfast love and faithfulness can be linked directly down to truth, to aletheus. And so that comes back over here to our other page of looking at what the New Testament version of this is. And this is one of the tricky things with language. When you have a rich idea like faithful, true, covenant, dependable, reliability, all wrapped up in one big word here, it's really hard to get an import in another language of that one word meaning exactly the same thing and having all the same connotations. It happens when we try to do Bible translation today. If you go into a culture, the old analogy is that, Eskimos have 100 different words for ice, but no word for something else. It's because of the culture. The culture that they're in builds these ideas. Yeah, snow, ice, whatever it is. I know. What was the thing that they don't have a word for, though? Heater? Fire. That's it. That's all. I don't know. I'm skating on thin ice there. Yeah, no suntan. Yeah. Anyway, but it's a cultural thing, right? Because as you move, there's a long history and story behind these words. This word hesed, this word emet, all of these in the Hebrew language. But then when you start porting them over into Greek and then into English or into Latin and then into English and then into all these other languages, unless you take a lot of time to kind of look at the individual uses and find their context and see what they're referring to, some things can get lost. It's easy to lose some of these aspects of language. But what the authors or the translators did as they were moving in the Septuagint and into the New Testament is that they used this concept and they used a multitude of different Greek words to refer to this one thing. Okay, so let's look here. The New Testament concept of truth is partially informed by its overlap with the Old Testament concept of reliability and trustworthiness. But because there is not a direct correspondence, remember, not a direct line between emet, truth, and aletheia, truth, the Septuagint occasionally needs to use pistis, which is faith or faithfulness, and diakosune, which is righteousness. Faith and righteousness both translate this word emet over and over again. And so we see like 3 different Greek words that are used to translate one Hebrew word. Sorry, it's messy. And that's some of the problem as we do Bible study here, because you can see what it looks like in the Old Testament. You can see the word that's there, and you're like, yep, I've got a good handle on that word. But then when you see the word righteousness or the word faith or the word grace or the word truth used in the New Testament, you're like, well, what did they mean there? Did they just mean faith as in belief, or did they mean faith as in faithfulness, truth? So it's difficult, and it's meant for us to linger on these things and meditate on them. All right. And I gave you the definitions there, basic definition of both emet and aletheia, because aletheia is the big idea there of truth in the New Testament. So we made those connections there between merciful and gracious, rahum wahanun, and charis, grace, and between love and faithfulness, hesed we'emet, and aletheia. But if you look up in Exodus, there's this other thing that's said there, right? He's a God merciful and gracious, not just abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, but also slow to anger. And man, I don't have time to go into it. If you were here for a Sunday morning we did Sunday school, I focused on this particular phrase, slow to anger. It's a Hebrew idiom that means long in the nose. or big nostriled would be another way to say it. It's a weird word. I'll let you play with that. But slow to anger, merciful, gracious, those get tied in together with one another. There's so much more to it that we could go into, but we don't have time right now. We don't have time. We are already out of time, amazingly. I don't know how. But as we close, as we've done each of these, we've looked not only at what this means for God, but what it means for us, right? As we see that God in His holiness is light, we are supposed to be light of the world. We are supposed to have new life in us because He is the source of life. We are supposed to be holy as He is holy. So there's this moving over. We are supposed to show glory, be glorious because we reflect His glory, as we saw last week. Well, what do we do here? As Christians, we are supposed to be those who, again, in a lowercase sense, a much smaller sense, display the grace and truth of God. The grace of God in that we are loving, kind, merciful, recognizing that everything that we have from God is not because we earned it, but because of His good and merciful grace. A gift from Him, our beneficent King. But also truth. And we can, I think, minimize it and say, well, yeah, we need to have grace and we need to have truth, and that means that we have to tell the truth. We got to speak the truth in love, and that is true. We need to do those things. We have to hold those things in balance. We need to speak the truth of God's word and hold people accountable for sin, because if there's no sin, then there's no good news, right? If there's no bad news, then the good news is cheap. Okay, so those are definitely true. But when we as people, as Christians, are called to be truth, okay? He is the truth, and we're called to emulate this truth. We see it in Paul's writings and all throughout the New Testament as being faithful. Are we going to be faithful to His word? Are we going to continually come back to this fountain of living water, or are we going to go and look elsewhere for our truth, our source of life? And so the grace and the truth play out not just in our relationship with God Himself, but in our relationship with other people. It's a vertical relationship and a horizontal relationship. So as we think about our relationships with coworkers and neighbors and everything else, do we lean towards one side or the other? Like if you were to be asked, which one are you? Are you more grace or are you more truth? Which side do you fall on? Because Jesus was 100% both. He was full of both grace and full of truth. 100% of both of them. And that's what we are called to as well. And that is not an easy road to walk. Is it? When you're confronted with, I don't know, if we're standing outside of an abortion clinic, which thankfully that's a little bit of a historical reference there. We've seen some progress on this, but We know there's still fights to be had, especially here in Florida. But if we're standing outside of an abortion clinic and we see someone who is there fighting for a woman's right to choose, which side do we fall on? We have to proclaim the truth, that this is a life, this is a child, this is not just a wrong decision or an embryo or a cluster of cells, but this is a human life here. This is truth. But do we have to share that truth in a mean and vindictive way? Or can we sit down and have a conversation? What would it look like to be standing there on opposite sides of a argument or a picket, and to give a cold cup of water or a donut or a cookie to your opponent, to show love, to recognize that this person is not your enemy, that the evil one is the enemy, that they've been blinded by Satan, that this is not a battle that we're fighting with them, that they are one who needs the grace of God just as we do. And so that is the hard battle that we wrestle with, whether it's on something as quote-unquote easy as abortion, or on any numerous number of topics. As you sit in your workplace and have a conversation with someone, and you're tempted to tell that little white lie to just make it a little bit easier on yourself, or to let something go down smoother. You can go, I can't do that. I'm committed to the truth. And they're going to go, well, that's just silly. Right? But how do you navigate these things? That's just something I urge you to look at, and to use Jesus as our source of truth. That he's not just the one that has the answers, but he's the steadfast, dependable one that we can count on his life and his example as a way to see these things, and that we can see his death, his burial, his resurrection as the source of our grace and the source of the greatest truth that we will ever have, that we are his, not from what we did, but because of what he has done. Any thoughts? Yes, ma'am. Mm. It's what spills over. Or when you plant a apple tree, you don't expect to get oranges, right? The thing is going to produce the fruit of that thing. Interesting. I didn't know that. You're gonna get a true reproduction based on the seed. Interesting. Genetically. That's cool. It's a faithful copy, a faithful representation. That's good. I like that. Any other thoughts? All right. As I have said before, if you do have questions, write them down, message me, tell me later, and we'll talk about them, not next week, but the following week. No, that's the 7th. That's Easter. Oh, my goodness, we have so many things going on. So we're going to do next week and look at seeing God in his fullness and looking at the idea of peace and shalom. And that will be our last look at God and his holiness and just this full picture that we see in John chapter 1. But then the next time we're together won't be Easter, and it won't be April 7th. Those are our next two after that. But April 14th, that'll be our Q&A for glory. So, or not glory, but for holiness. So more as we go from there, but think about those questions as you have them. Let me pray for us as we close. Heavenly Father, we thank you. God, we thank you that as we look at your word, there's no separation There's no difference between your way of interacting with your people in the Old Testament and your way of interacting with your people in the New Testament. The only difference is Christ as the fulfillment and fullness of your nature in the Old Testament. He is showing us your purpose and who you really are and what you are really about. He is a true and accurate copy of your nature, oh God. And so, God, as we look at the New Testament, as we see the life and the ministry of Jesus, as we see his death, burial, and resurrection, let us look at these things not just with thankful hearts that we have been redeemed, but also with an eye to being an image of this. That is your purpose for us. As we saw last week, that our purpose is to be copies of Christ, to be conformed to the image of the Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And so, God, we thank you that you have started this work in us and that you will see it to completion, that you are growing in us this fruit of righteousness, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, truth, gentleness, self-control. God, you want to see these things fully in our lives so that Christ can present us before you as pure, as holy, as a bride that he is proud of. So God, I pray that as we sojourn through this life, that we would not fight against your growing of the fruits of the Spirit in our heart and life, but that we would embrace them, even when that growth means pruning, even when that growth means a cutting back. It's hard, it's painful in the moment, but we know that you work all things together for the good of those who love you and are called according to your purpose. In Christ Jesus' name we pray. Amen.